We begin with Chris in Georgia, who's been waiting a very long time. Thank you, Chris, for your patience. You're on the air. What's going on today?
Hey, 49 minutes.
Yeah, I saw you on the timer, so wanted to get to you right away. Thank you, Chris.
That's okay. I just want to talk about a couple things. Number one, you've heard of the band Heat, right?
H-E-A-T, yes.
Yes, from Sweden. I'd like for them to get a lot more attention. I know they've only been to the States once for Melodic Rock Fest in Chicago. They're really good. You talk a lot about all these new bands that are younger, like Greta Van Fleet and the Struts and all that kind of stuff. And, I hear those bands and I don't hear it. I don't hear the melody, the hooks, but this band, Heat, who write all their own stuff, and they even do some songs for some other bands too, they're really, really good. I'd like for them to get a lot of attention, and I think it's really good that you support that kind of stuff because while at the same time I know you support a lot of the older bands when they do these one-off things like, Lynch does something with one guy that's popular or whatever, and that's it. They just shit out one good album, and then they never tour for it, and that's it. That's good you support that, but it'd be really great if you could support more bands like Heat or even play them.
Well, I mean, my criteria for supporting new bands to me is just that they're good and they get on my radar, whether they're made up of guys from a lot of other bands or they're brand new bands. Earlier today, on my show on Volume, I had a brand new band in called Bishop Gun, just because they're a really good bluesy rock band that I was turned on to recently, and I had them on. They're literally brand new. I mean, they've got one record that they did themselves, and that's it. So I have no agenda or any criteria for featuring new music or bands on any of my shows beyond the fact that I got to feel that it's good and that the audience is going to like it. I've heard of the band. I think, Chris, don't quote me on this because they've been announcing bands like every day, but I think that band was or will be on the next Monsters of Rock cruise.
Will you be on that?
Yeah, I'm on every one. I host every one. Now I believe that
out.
Yeah, I believe they were either on previously or will be on the new one or the next one coming up next year. I don't have it right in front of me, but they may be one of the bands.
You need to check them out.
Yeah, well, cruises like that, those are great catalysts for a ton of bands that can't normally tour in America or really don't have the draw to even do a club tour, but they can get together for their fans in one environment where they can also get in front of a lot of people. So things like Monsters of Rock Cruise and stuff like that, great opportunities for bands like that to get exposure to people who wouldn't normally see them, and also for their hardcore fans to be able to see them.
Right. And you mentioned something earlier this week, not this week, last week, about you were saying it depends on if you can have all the, people can be the best musicians ever, but if they can't write a good song, then it really doesn't matter. And and you probably disagree with me, the first thing I thought of was, the new Warrant stuff. They got a really good singer, Robert Mason, but whoever's writing the songs, you can't do what Jani Lane did. That's impossible for those guys, but I just don't hear there's no hook, melody, because a lot of it, these guys are older and there's no fire in their belly, so they're not eager to just, get out there and make that money, and which, there's not much money to be made in that market. It's just, if they can't write really good songs that are, even commercial ready, just radio ready, can they, do
well, the thing about
Cooper does and just hire a writer?
Well, the thing about it, Chris, is this. New music for classic bands is pretty much no matter if it's good or not good, unfortunately, is just simply a dead issue because it doesn't have anywhere to get exposure for any long term. There's nothing that can be done with it. So I disagree with you. The Warrant album, Rockaholic, I thought was really good, actually. Really good. One of the ones with Robert. But the thing about Warrant, it's interesting to use them as an example because with Warrant, the one guy not in the band is Jani Lane, who, of course, passed away. Right. And Jani Lane was the sole songwriter of pretty much every single Warrant song they ever made. So that's big,
in a way,
big
he kind of
thing.
handicapped that band, in a way. When you have a singer who does, like Rachel Bolan, well, he writes with Snake, but when you have a band that has pretty much one or two songwriters in the band at all, you really handicap them, because if that person ever goes and they need to replace that person and they don't write good songs, the band is done.
Well, here's the thing. Here's where I disagree with you. First of all, there are instances where guys come in and pick up the slack, okay? But here's the thing. When you're talking about bands like Warrant or Skid Row or any of these bands, the whole thing is based on what was, if we're just being honest. Yes, they make new music. Some of them make good new music, but you can't get arrested with it. Outside of shows like mine, there is no place for real mass exposure for it, and it sells to the hardcore fans in week one, and then it's largely done. So how important new music is to these guys and their growth and their survival out there, it doesn't matter. 95% of the people are coming to hear the old stuff, and that's where they are going to make their living on the road. So new records are nice because it breathes some new life into the band. It gives them a chance to be creative. Maybe they play one song when they go out and play live. But all of these bands, the whole draw is based on what happened 35 years ago.
True. It's going to run out, though, eventually. I mean, people are going to get too old to really care about that stuff, or even, want to go to concerts and stuff. And
well, it depends.
I really like that music, and
yeah, I mean, look, it
just sucks.
It's well, I don't know. I'm not quite as doom and gloom about it as you are, Chris. But thank you for the call. I understand what you're saying, but I'm just a complete realist here, where the next movement of rock music, the next great wave of rock music, which I believe we're on the cusp of happening right now, it's not going to be driven by Warrant or Skid Row or anyone else making new music. In other words, whether those bands make good music or not, you hope it's good, but whatever it is, should they make new music going forward, that is what it is. It is to sell to the hardcore fan base that cares about it. And in a week, it's forgotten. It's just the truth. I mean, I'd give you a million examples of it. If we're going to get a wave of the future for rock music, it's going to come from newer, younger bands. And we are catching that right now. There are so many great newer bands that are either in the process of breaking or can very well break one day. Had one on my show earlier today. I had one on my show a couple weeks ago called Dirty Honey. Tyler Bryant and the Shakedown, Jared James Nichols, Rival Sons, The Struts. I wouldn't even know where to stop. I mean, Blackstone Cherry, Blackberry Smoke, on and on and on. There's so many of these bands bubbling right now that really could open the doors and kick the doors down. Those are the bands that could lead the next wave of great rock. It is not going to come from 80s bands making new music. That is purely going to be stuff to help them continue to support their touring and to sell to their existing fan base. Because there just isn't any sustained outlets of support for it and not enough audience out there looking for it. But your point about the key songwriters not being in these bands anymore, that's an interesting point. Because it's certainly the case with Warrant, although I would disagree with you in that I think Warrant did make a couple good records without Jani Lane recently. They did find a way to overcome that, and the rest of the guys pick up the slack and write songs. But that's a case where all of the classic material was written by one guy, and that guy sadly is no longer alive. You want another example? Although the guy is alive, is the band Kix. The huge majority of all the songs written by Kix or recorded by Kix, all the classic Kix material was written by the one guy who's not in that band anymore. The bass player, Donnie Purnell. Kix is 4/5 the original lineup. It's a very high ratio by today's standards. But the one guy not in the band is the guy that wrote all the songs. Now, Kix went and made a new record a few years ago, and that's another example of those guys picking up the slack, becoming songwriters, and they made a really good record. So it is possible. But to me, that's the more interesting part of your, your comments, is the fact that the band's trying to make new music, but one of the key member who wrote all the classic stuff isn't part of it anymore, or in the case of Warren, isn't alive anymore. But make no mistake, all of those bands, their entire thing is built on what they did in the 80s and playing that stuff live. I love new music from these guys. I support it. I care about it, but it is not the driver to their career, unfortunately.